At the end of high school, is when I kind of decided that I was really interested in pursuing acting, right? Taking the risk, I suppose with my future of
Yeah.
entering into what is considered an iffy career choice,
Hmm.
and decided the smartest thing would be to, if I wanted to move to California, to go to college in California so that it would
Right.
get me out here, that I could study, would get my feet wet with the, not really excuse, but with college, And then once I got out of college, I was already here and set up to pursue my career with, not that you need a degree, but I had the maturity gained from college and the information that I learned at Chapman, which is where I went to school, and then was able to move up to LA so that I could begin doing the nuts and bolts stuff that it takes to get an acting career off the ground. And at the start of that, I wasn't really thinking about voiceovers or particularly interested in voiceovers necessarily, but as you progress in your career, so in my early 20s, you're looking for ways that all actors make money and what things do actors do. And I
Yeah.
wasn't unfamiliar with voiceovers, but I hadn't thought about pursuing it specifically. And then a roommate of mine said, "Hey, do you want to take this voiceover class?" Because at the time I had worked at a Warner Brothers company who needed voiceovers because everything needs voiceovers. And they knew that I was an actor. And so they often would ask me to, do a one-liner for a project, a one-line promo kind of thing. And
Hmm.
that's what got my wheels turning when I thought, hey, these are professional elements that I could use to compile a reel. And then when my roommate said, let's take a voiceover class, I thought, okay, let's take this class. And then I we took the class and I thought to myself, wow, I'm really good at this. Uh, I wonder if I should put more effort into voiceovers. So I did, because that's where I was sort of feeling the love, meaning I would send out my materials and people would call me back. I would get more attention than I was getting in my on camera pursuits. And so I just began pursuing that, and things opened up for me while pursuing that. So that's what led me into voiceovers. And then the beginning of your question was, what got me out here to pursue it in the first place.
Yeah. So, right before you started actively doing voiceover stuff, were you just, oh, okay. So, did you just have a job already in the entertainment industry, but you weren't like acting on
Yeah, I
camera?
got out of college and you have to make a living. So I
Yeah.
moved up to LA. Chapman is in Orange County. And I had never been a waiter. And several friends of mine, meaning I didn't have experience, I didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And a couple of friends of mine had success doing temp work. And because of school, I had computer skills. And this is at a time when, although computers were around, uh, how do I want to make this sound? Computers were everywhere,
Yeah.
but not the way they are now.
Right. Yeah.
Like at that time, you still didn't really have one at your house unless you needed one.
Mhm.
And but I knew I had Word and Excel skills, and I could type really well. And so instead of becoming a waiter, I went into temp work.
Oh, okay.
And I lived here in this area, and so a lot of the jobs you would get, a lot of the temp jobs you would get were in show business, which I kind
Yeah.
of knew that they were. And so we wanted to see how that would impact me moving forward in show business. Plus, I needed to make a living. And so when I ended up at a company called, at the time, Warner New Media, where they were making a lot of CD-ROMs, when CD-ROM was a thing that you would connect to for games or whatever
Mhm.
else. And it's also the kind of media that relies heavily on voiceover.
Yep.
So yes, I had a job in show business.
Okay.
Not really glamorous, but it was a great job. It was one of my fondest memories of a job I had right out of college, working for Warner Brothers in a building that overlooked the studio.
Yeah.
Programming karaoke was the job, typing in the lyrics and programming the highlighter to go along with it. And then it gave me the inkling to do voiceovers. And then after that, I pursued voiceovers and kept working full time during the day until that became hard to do because my career then demanded my time during the day.
Yeah.
But I had to work during the day, but you can't make a living if you can't work. And so that was a hard time. And it's, I think, a hard time for all actors when you're making just enough money in acting, but not enough to live on, that you still have to work. And so then you got to find out how to make that money. It's the main struggle, I think, for most people pursuing artistic endeavors.
So, and then prior to voiceover again, when you were you auditioning for on-camera stuff like
Oh
actively?
yeah, and even in the first few years of my voiceover career, I was still going out for on-camera commercials, and even did a couple of on-camera commercials. I had a
Oh,
big
okay.
piece that hit in like 1999 at a football game with my face painted. It happened to be in the Visa commercial,
Oh,
uh, a Denver Broncos theme, and so it was fun to have
yeah.
booked that commercial. Just because being from Denver, I don't really give a rip about football, but if you were to ask me who I'm a fan of, I would say it was the Denver Broncos. But so that was fun. Yeah, I kept pursuing on-camera stuff because although I didn't think of voiceovers as a side gig, when you're out here in LA being an actor, you do the things that actors do. And that was try out for commercials, try to get on TV shows, people that you know pull you in. I'm a singer, and so I'm associated with a couple of choirs, and that led to us being a choir in the movie Christmas with the Cranks.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you just do everything that actors do, but it had become my main focus to pursue voiceover. And then at a certain point, that's all I had time to do. I didn't have time to do on-camera auditions anymore, and so that's when I just fully stayed in voiceover. Not necessarily by choice. That's just what ended up happening.
Yeah. Yeah, because I just talked to Wendy Lee, and I didn't even know that you were a singer until she said that. She's like, "Yeah, Steve is an amazing singer," and yeah.
We have collaborated a couple of times on shows that required singing,
Yeah.
and in certain elements of animation or in voiceover, uh, you're you have to copy something, maybe in another language, by rote. Nobody sends you sheet music and
Yeah.
stuff that's easier to follow along if you have musical knowledge. And so we would often collaborate because she has a musical ear and I have a musical ear, and we've had to come up with stuff on the fly that it's more difficult to come up with quickly if you don't have a trained ear. So yeah, Wendy and I have collaborated a lot on musical singing things that have to go into a cartoon that don't have a lot of elements to show you what to do. We have to make it up on our own.
Right. So do you remember what your first voice role in anime was?
I do, but you're gonna have to. I can never remember the name because they at a certain point they all start sounding the same. But it was a role I did in the early '90s where I played twins. I was both twins, and I think it starts
Oh,
with a T.
Fushigi Yuugi.
Fushigi Yuugi, yeah, there. So it doesn't start with a T. It starts with an F. I can never remember that. And it was a long time ago. At this point, but that was 20 years ago. But I played both twins. And I was in my 20s when I did that. And that was my first job. And I got I think, a leading role.
Yeah.
And that was because a friend of mine who I um, do looping with, if you know what looping is, that's putting voices and
Yep.
into TV shows and movies.
Yep.
She was at the same time directing, and she said, "Hey, come try out for this dubbing thing that I'm directing." And so
That
that was
must
my
be,
first job.
that must have been Bridget Hoffman.
It was, yeah,
Yeah.
that was Bridget, and I still. What's great about that is all these years later, I still see her. I was just in a Zoom movie with her that a friend of ours wrote
Oh,
and it's putting together, and Bridget and I had a scene together. So it's fun after all these years to still be associated with the people from the beginning because we all still do the same job. So yes, Bridget Hoffman pulled me in, and also at the same time I was friends with Mona Marshall, and
yep.
she introduced me to other companies.
Yep. Well, I never knew that Fushigi Yugi was your first role because that's one of my favorite uh, roles of yours of Suboshi and Amiboshi. Um,
Yes, yes, thank you. Yes, that's the names of the characters. I'm sorry I don't remember them offhand, and it's one of my faults when it comes to the characters. I
yeah.
I know them, but I cannot keep all the terminology in my head.
Well, did
That was a
you?
fun show, and it was a good experience. And what's funny is I can think back to that show because I wasn't a seasoned dubber at the time,
Yeah,
but mimicry and synchronizing had always all the skills that make voiceover right for me are things that I had been doing naturally all my life, making fun of people, doing characters, mimicking what people were saying with their mouth, which then turns into what becomes sync when you're dubbing to watch the mouth and put the words
yeah.
into it. And I learned a lot on that show. Simple things like how having headphones on both your ears affects your performance because you think you're yelling, but you're really not because you're hearing so much of yourself, so you're not giving. And she kept saying, I feel like you're holding back. I feel like you're holding back. And I was like, I don't feel like I'm holding back. But then I realized that the headphones were causing me to think I was giving more than I really was. Things like that. So that was
Right.
a fun experience. And I felt very comfortable with Bridget, right? Not putting me on the defensive, not putting me back on my heels the way sometimes you feel like in show business when you really have to hold your own in a certain situation with people telling you what to do.
So do you have like a story of how, if you related at all to Amiboshi or Suboshi or one or the other, because they're both different
No,
personality
the
wise.
fun was figuring out how to make them different. And I can't remember if we recorded all of one and then the other. I'm guessing that's what we did. If I were
Okay.
directing it, that's what I would do.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I don't have those memories because you're standing there ignorant of the show. You don't know anything about it really, and you're
Yeah.
relying on the director to say that was good. I think he's a little bit more angry. Okay, I'll do that again, more angry, and then it ends up building this cartoon, the totality of which I'm uncertain of because we don't get to see the whole thing.
Hmm.
So I built each character with Bridget's guidance and
Yep.
how she felt that it was to go. Then you show that to management and they want pickups, and then you create something that's satisfactory.
Yep. Was that the first time that you had met all the other like iconic anime people who were in that show? Like Wendy was in that show and David Hayter and like Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, and was that like your first? That must have been like your first time meeting everybody else if that was your first role in anime.
That's interesting. The first time I ever met Wendy was my first session on Outlaw Star. That was the first
Oh,
time I ever met her. When I
yeah.
walked into the studio, I'm trying to remember where that went down. I feel like it was at, well, what's now Studiopolis on Ventura. And I had never met her before. And I can't remember the first time I met Mary Elizabeth, which means it was a long time ago about that time. And the point I would like to make is that on on that show, the only person I ever interacted with was Bridget,
Okay.
because where we worked at Animes, the door to the parking lot was you'd go straight in the door, and then the studio was just right there. So
Yep.
I never really interacted with anyone. I went in, it was Bridget, and I left. Like if I didn't even know that Mary was on that show until you just told me right now.
Okay.
So I met everybody because we were all doing the same job, which means somewhere
Yeah.
else I met them sitting in a waiting room, and somewhere else I met them because we were overlapping on something else. And so that's where you meet everybody. Or in the case of like Mona, I knew Mona because we had the same agent. And so you go to your
Oh,
agent's office to sit there and read commercials and stuff, and you make friends with all those people. And pretty soon you realize that you know everybody who does this job because, especially at the time, only so many people were doing this job. It wasn't the way people think about it now. No one thought about voice acting at the time. No one. We
right.
were invisible.
Yeah, because I've always thought it was interesting how many um, people that became huge in anime, like Fushigi Yuugi was one of their first roles. Like it was, I mean, you, Derek Stephen Prince, Kirk Thornton, um, yeah, like people I already mentioned, Melody Spivak, just like literally everybody, and it was just like an amazing cast.
Yeah, and the majority of the people you just mentioned are still
Yeah.
part of this game. Like Steve, I just directed him a couple weeks ago. Kirk is on my schedule, but his morning got canceled because we had a engineer get sick. So I mean, everyone is still here in the mix. Only we're only seeing everybody on Zoom now.
Yeah. So did you even know what anime was when you got that role?
That's a That's a good question. The easy answer is no, I didn't. But when I went in and looked at it, I was like, this reminds me of things that I sometimes saw on TV in high school on like WGN or Saturday
Oh yeah.
afternoon. So I felt that I had been exposed to it in some way because it looked familiar. But as far as it being called anime and what that was, no, I didn't know that at all. It looked like a cartoon, and the job was dubbing, and you do what the director says, and then they say thank you, and you leave. And that's how I looked at it because I was pursuing, many different things, and so my day to day life was about pursuing those things
Yep.
more than necessarily learning about what it was I was performing in.
Yeah. I had another question about Fushigi Yugi. Well, did you? Because I know, like, obviously Suboshi gets killed at the very end of the series. Were you? I was just curious what your reaction to the when that happened and the emotional stuff that happened between both the brothers. The like diet
Well,
the how things went with you. But I mean, I guess if you weren't really knowing about the story, then that's hard to
I
ask.
knew about the story to a certain degree,
Okay.
but in terms of how it affected me, the answer to that question is more about what it's like to be in the booth in the moment. And for me, I'm not necessarily thinking about the plot per se,
Yeah.
because my opinion has always been that the plot is already figured out. The plot is already written. The plot was already acted out by the Japanese voice actors. The plot is already there. I don't
Mhm.
need to know what the plot is about. What I need to know about is this exact moment on line 142. And what is happening in this moment, only this moment, this sentence, what are they thinking and feeling? Of course, the plot impacts that, but a lot of other information doesn't. What is happening in this moment, and how can I fulfill that with my skills and leave it there based on what I feel is the truth of that moment? And then the plot is just automatically taken care of because it's already there. So when you
Right.
say, how did I react to that? Well, I didn't have feelings about it based on the plot the way you would as an audience member.
Yeah.
I could only concern myself with digging deep and finding what I needed to find in any one of those given moments in order to create it and put it out there so that it made sense as part of this project. So that's a more nuanced view, but I really feel that's ultimately what's happening.
Yeah, because I was just thinking now, in knowing now that that was your first role in anime, that maybe it wasn't at all to you, but I mean, maybe if it were me, I might be a little bit daunted, playing twins and then having it be a main role, one of them dying, and then having a totally different emotion for each one of them too.
Right. And those are the things that we dug into.
Yeah.
And the only time you dig into those things is when that's the next line. And you're like,
Yeah.
okay, right. Now this is really serious moment. What are you going to come up with in various takes, right? You try one like this, then you try one like that, then you try one like this. And then an editor puts those together. And so my job is to come up with as many different plausible ways to express any given moment that is possible. And then the collaborative art turns it over to other people to turn it into the story that you see. So
Yep.
I do my part, and in my opinion, my part is about each of those moments one at a time and creating the truth. And the story is created using that emotion across a plot structure and plan that's already been figured out.
Yep. So then I know it would have been around the same time, but I think besides just having like a minor roles in shows like Ray Earth and one of the dubs of Akira.
I
Um,
think of Magic Knight Ray Earth as the second show I ever did. Master
yeah,
Mage Clef. That one I remember the title because that was the first time I ever worked with uh, Eric Sherman.
yep,
Um, he directed that, and it was the first time I was getting to do a character. He was a mage, and so
yeah,
that was different than me just playing teenagers.
yep,
And I also remember that fondly because I feel like that's when Bang Zoom was Eric, Pat, and Eric's wife, and now it's
Yeah.
this huge company. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's fond because it just shows how much time has gone by.
Was that because I know a lot of the same people that were in Fushigi Yuugi were in that, but was that your
Mhm.
first time? Was that your first time meeting Julie Madalena? Because she was a lead in Rare Earth.
Wow, I don't know if I knew that. I mean, I totally know Julie. We were on a series called Secret Millionaires Club together. We
Yeah.
have both worked at Bang. She's also a director. You know, I always think of her kids as these little boys, and it turns out, you know, they're grown men, right? Time goes by like that. So I
Yeah.
don't remember if I met her on Magic Knight Ray Earth, but I sure have known her for a really long time.
Yeah. So was your approach to Clef then, like you said, just completely different than your approach to Amiboshi and Suboshi?
Oh yeah, because like I said, it was a character, so I had to come up with what that was supposed to be. I was following the direction of what Eric wanted it to be, which is ultimately what you're serving as a actor. The director's the one in charge. You do what the director says, and then the editor puts together and mixes a show.
Right. Yeah.
Things were a little different back then, also in terms of what you created, because at the front of my career, and I wish I knew technologically more what was going on, but it wasn't digitized. There was still a machine room, a tape room, where they would put in, I guess, like a beta SP into a machine, and at the end of every take, it would have to roll back for you to do it again. Now, of course, the
Yeah.
digital just goes pop pop. But even when I would do feature films and movies at the beginning of my career, they were on video that had to
Yeah.
rewind to start a takeover again. And so that made the process, I don't know if I can say it was slower, but it definitely was a little bit different than it was now. And so there was a lot of waitings that gave me time to rehearse in between or pick the lines. And then, like I said, the rest is just collaborating with the director. And then even technical things like, wow, what a great performance, but it's 20 frames too long. Well, that can't be. So you got to do it again, 20 less frames. And so there are a lot of technical considerations that go on to performance as well in terms of getting the final product that works.
Yeah. So I can sidetrack here briefly. 'Cause I know you were. I mean, maybe you are still doing it now, but I know there's a bunch of big movies that you were like ADR on
Uh
in
huh.
that same time frame. How did that was that something that you were already doing before anime?
Yeah, you kind of cut out there, but were you asking me about not just dubbing projects, but doing other big features and TV shows and stuff?
Yeah, like at that same time, yeah.
Yeah.
Or
At that same time, I was working a lot in uh, TV shows and features like doing voices, Goodwill Hunting, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Vegas Vacation. I
yeah,
know these are all old, but that was the time frame you're talking about.
yeah,
Um, and I still do that, not as much as I did then, but it's still one of the ways that a actor makes money. And back at that time, there were just a lot of movies that utilized what my skills were, and I was lucky enough to be a part of groups that would hire me for that
yeah,
position. Now I do that from the closet.
yeah. And is ADR for that, is that kind of much more difficult to you than dubbing anime, or is that all kind of the same thing to you?
From a skill set, it's essentially the same in terms of what
Yeah,
I have to bring. In looping, though, you have to improvise and you have to come up with it right away when you see it on the screen. You have to be able
yeah,
to mimic somebody when you don't even know what they're talking about and make it look like it fits. You have to have skills to know and understand what ADR is and how it relates to making a movie or a TV show so that you can bring that. But
mhm,
from a skill set, dubbing is also ADR and it is all post production. And so it's relatively the same from a technical standpoint and the things that need to happen. But in looping, you're standing up and you're in a big room, and dubbing, you're in a tiny room and you're just looking at the screen. But the skills, matching sync, coming up with emotions out of nowhere to fit whatever scene you're in, exactly the same.
yep. So going back to anime, I know when at that same time as Ray Earth, I think that was when Kenshin was getting dubbed, and obviously you were Sozo in that. And that's kind of a central character for a lot of people, even though he's not really in the show on screen for very much. But
Right, which is something that impacts my memory of that show because since we all do lines one at a time by ourselves, if I have a pivotal character but a limited number of lines, that means my exposure to this show might only have been 4 hours total over the entire stretch of the series. 4 hours of my life, you know what I mean?
yeah,
And so that sometimes leaves some of these shows, even with pivotal characters, a little foggy in my memory. You know what I mean?
yeah. So when you're a lead in something like Arc the Lad, that's
I haven't thought of that in so long. Oh my gosh, Arc the Lad. Wow, you could really blow my mind by reminding me of some things. But yes, Arc the Lad. Go ahead with your question. Wow.
what just obviously that must have just been way more easy to remember for you, considering how like
Yeah, when you have lines on every page, you get to be part of the story. But when you only have 7 lines every 10 pages, it just seems like a disjointed thing. And that's where it comes down to the one line. What is happening in this moment? How can I most truthfully reveal this given what the director has said and what they're looking for? Because sometimes if the director just says louder and you do it louder, well, even though I don't know why I'm doing it louder, it fits the director is looking for, and the director is the one who knows. And so you just throw that out doing your part of the collaborative process. It just so happens that my part of the collaborative process is out front.
yeah. So was that um the role of Arc, was that uh like one of your favorite roles personally? Do you
Yeah,
think?
I like the roles that are adventurous, young hero, things that didn't require too much angst or too much screaming. But maybe I'm talking about that from my perspective now. But yes, and I'm glad you reminded me about Arc the Lab. Like I said, I had not thought about that in so long.
Yeah. And
I'm gonna look that up after we go. I try to remind myself about something like that's right. Oh, that's right.
yeah. Um
Wow.
I'm not sure this one, I don't know if you'd remember unless I like said it in detail, but one of the besides Fushigi Yugi, when I was growing up, one of the central roles that instilled your voice in my head was in one of the episodes of Nightwalker. Do you remember working on that?
Not really.
Not really.
You'll help me out.
So it's a horror series, and it's episodic, and one of the episodes, like each episode is about like some kind of monster or spirit disrupting a human person's life. And you played this angel that was inhibiting inside a necklace that this girl won in a lottery or something. And then
Okay.
it was actually feeding off of like her life energy, and it was actually like this grotesque monster that's revealed at the very end. And then,
Yes.
so do you remember what I'm saying now? Kind of
Yeah.
a
And
little bit.
again, that falls under the category of not as an actor, not sitting there wondering what all happened before and after, but
Yeah,
what can I create right here and now that makes it fun for me, that is as big as I want to be, and just enjoy throwing out those moments. And then when it's put together with everybody else, it makes something greater than the original, and it has this whole story. Talk about another one that I'm going to look up and remind myself. But I know me. The minute I see the picture, I'm going to go, "Oh, right, I remember. I remember doing all that."
yeah, because
That one again to me. I'm sorry. Tell me the title again.
Nightwalker.
Oh, Nightwalker, of course. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, it's
You're
okay.
you're taking me back. I'm gonna have to write that down. You're taking me back.
um, well, and even back then, I thought too that it was cool to hear you in a horror series, because that's not really something that you have really been
Yeah, at
in
the
very
beginning of
much.
my career, especially, I wasn't doing scary grown-up things. And so
Yeah.
it's fun that directors, producers, and clients would give me a chance to do some crazy stuff like that, because the only place you get to do that is in cartoons. I wouldn't be playing
Yeah.
parts like that on camera.
Hmm.
And
True.
so to get to say some of these delicious lines are amazing. I love it. Lines that you would only say if you got a part in, a fantasy movie or Star Wars or something.
Yeah. And then what was your reaction, if you remember much of the process of being in the second Card Captor movie as Yukito?
Say that show again?
The second Card Captor Sakura movie.
The soccer show?
No, it was card.
Sakura.
The series was Card Captor Sakura.
Oh my God. I need to have a list here of looking this up. I'm going to do this. Forgive me on my phone. That, I got to be honest, I don't remember that at all. But again,
Okay.
if I saw a picture, I would go, oh yeah, that one. Because remember, in my life, I get the booking and it's where and when, what studio, or what time. And then you show up and they say, okay, in this scene, something, something, something. And then later he turns into a monster. So right now he's sad because the girlfriend, okay.
Yeah.
And then you say the line, oh, Nightwalker, there it is. Nice. Love it. Oh my gosh. Thank you for that
Yep.
reminder. Holy cow. And the other one I'll get to later.
Okay. There's some other early roles I know that you were in Gatekeepers, which was another one that I watched when I was younger.
Little kid.
Yeah. And let's see. Oh yeah, you were in Prince of Tennis. That was like one of your bigger roles too.
Prince of Tennis. Now that I absolutely remember.
Yeah.
That's the first time I met Renee. We did that at a place called Salami. None of us could believe we were doing an anime that was about tennis. We were all like, what in the world is this about? And those are fun group shows because just everybody is on the show.
Yep. Right. And then you were another role that people don't really ask you about from a older series is you were one of the leads in X.
Love that show.
Yeah.
That was such a cool, dark show. And I had a big part on that, but it more of a pivotal part.
Yeah.
But there's still a great poster hanging up in Bang Zoom of X that we all signed. And that was a cool show. That had a great vibe to it.
Yeah, because that was another role of yours that wasn't really up until that point too. There wasn't really anything like that you had ever done before.
Right. That was a kind of a manly part, a grown man, a stronger, cooler part. And I remember thinking that as I was doing it, and that made it fun.
Mm-hmm. And
similar to parts like McGillis and these things that
yeah,
modern times.
Yeah, and one of my friends is a big fan of Hajime no Ippo, so he wanted me to make sure to ask you about that.
That show was fun for so many different reasons. It was hard work, man. There were a lot of lines, 11 hours a week worth of lines.
Wow, yeah.
And punching and hitting and running and the innocence and the strength. There was so much going on in that show. But what made that fun was that Richard Epcar was the director. And although I've been directed by Richard many times, never where we were together for 11 hours a week, over and over working on this show. And since he's from Colorado too, which has nothing to do with this, but we crack each other up. We both find one another very funny. And so there we were at work, just everything we had to be like, okay, let's get back to work now, because everything just kept cracking us up. And remember, he also played the coach, Kid. So that's what he and I always say to each other. Whenever I see him, I'm like, Kid.
Yeah.
What was the coach's name?
I don't remember. I haven't seen that show in a really.
I don't either, because I was called Coach Ippo Makanouchi.
Yeah. This is obvious, I'm sure, but was there like a lot of physicality for you in the booth recording?
Oh my God, it was endless. Just and then some of those sequences where it's going like this, and you're trying to chase it, and you're just laying out punches and hits and doing more hits, and then you've got to run. Remember all the running? Mostly, Fighting Spirit was about running.
Yep.
Lots of running, lots of running.
Yeah.
But what a great character! I mean, I did love Ippo because he had to keep overcoming the odds, and he was super likable, right? You couldn't not like Ippo, and
Right.
so it definitely is a show that had a lot of heart. And like I said, my memories of that show are more me being at work doing it than they are of necessarily what that show is about. But I have fond memories of that show.
Yeah, that's cool. Was there when you all the roles that you were um all the roles that you played on Digimon, that must have been like a totally fun thing for you or anybody who was like a
Yeah,
anybody who voiced that
because
show.
that show went on for a long time, and when
Yeah.
I first got that job, we were working all the way down at the old Saban building on Wilshire, which sucked because it was a long way away from my house. First of all, I live in the valley, and it was down on Wilshire in the 405, and we had to go through security to get up in the Saban building and show your bag, and then go up to the studio on the third or fourth floor. But it was a great studio, and then at a certain point, that moved to a private studio in the valley close to my house. But that show was fun because of the freedom that the producers, the originators, the Japanese originators allowed our producer to have, which had free reign over the writing and even new music, which generally when you're doing a dub, you're doing an English version of the Japanese show, period.
Yeah.
But they were allowed to do new music. The writing didn't have to be so specific to the original. So she was able to take liberties. And then, of course, my main memories of that show are working with Mary Elizabeth, who was the director,
Yep.
and Dave Barr, who engineered most of it. And in fact, I was thinking of them on that show the other day when I was directing, because every once in a while she would give instructions, and then you'd go for it, and then at the end of it, I would see her and David trade a dollar bill, meaning they would say, "Okay, is he going to go for the 4 lines, or is he just going to go for one?" And then I would go for one or whatever, and they would trade the money because they had bet what my approach was going to be. And that was fun. We had so much fun. I don't know how we ever got that work done.
Yeah. Right. So then,
Really.
yeah. So then, right, kind of when Digimon would have ended, that was when you started voicing Neji.
Yeah, you know what? That was about the time when Digimon ended. And what was great about Digimon ending, and the character that I played, Koji, was he got to have a lot of heart himself on the show. He got to go through a lot, which made it fun. It didn't seem like a 13 and under anime. It felt like
Right.
I got to do something, dig into a deeper character. And so that was fun. And yeah, that was followed up more or less at the beginning of Naruto all these many years ago.
Yep. And when you were stepping into Neji's role, like, did you come to this, like, is there anything that you share in common with him?
In a way, I am serious like Neji. I'm kind of left brain, Virgo oriented, even though I don't know if Neji's a Virgo. I know that he does have a birthday, and I know that some people send me things, even though I don't remember what that is.
Yeah.
I would say that part. In terms of creating the character, like I said earlier, that's a collaboration between you and the director and what I'm calling management on the first session, where they say, now do it like this, now try it like this, now try it like this, what about this? And then they play it back and say, let's go from there, let's try it starting about there. And then you start and they say, okay, that's good, let's adjust this way. And then you finally get to the point where you feel solid with what the character is based on experimentation with your superiors, and then that's where the character settles in.
Yeah. Do you think you're more like Toshiro, or do you think you're more like Neji?
The fact that I'm actually thinking about that, but I got to think about it. I feel like I would be inclined to say Neji, but I do love Hitsugaya's ego, in chargeness,
Yeah.
power. That's cool too.
Yeah.
So maybe a little bit of both of them, but I suppose more like Neji.
So with Toshiro, is that kind of a different because obviously he was voiced by a female in the Japanese dub. So um,
Right. And I remember thinking, okay, keep this light,
okay,
keep
yeah,
him powerful. And then obviously they were, I don't want to say doing something different, but doing something different with hiring a male for that job. But they just wanted to keep it light register to imply the masculinity, I guess, more than in the original, which the original, I'm guessing, female was mostly to keep it sounding young, because that's the whole thing about him is he's a master but young.
yeah. And weren't you primarily weren't you primarily Shuhei in Bleach too? Like, didn't you primarily voice him, or were you only sometimes?
Yes, but I feel that Hitsugaya was a bigger part than Shuhei.
Yeah,
Even though I loved that to get to do two characters on a show, because sometimes they're like, you're doing two characters and they're both teenagers. And I'm like, well, it's not that easy to differentiate. But
yeah,
to differentiate between Hitsugaya and Shuhei, it was fun to go to those sessions because we'd do Shuhei and then we'd turn right around and do Hitsugaya. And it was fun to do characters that were so different on the same show. And I don't even really remember how that happened. I got to be honest.
okay,
Next thing I knew, I was doing two characters, I think.
yeah. Well, that's lucky, obviously. And I know another one of your big roles at that same time was Moondoggy in Eureka Seven.
Go through all Land Valley. What's funny about that is I remember the vocal ref. You know, when you go to work every time, if you're only working for 2 hours, but any given amount of episodes, you have X number of hours. But
Yeah,
then at the beginning, you have to do a vocal ref because I might have had two other jobs that day. I got to be dialed into this voice. And for some reason, that show in particular, I remember one of my vocal ref lines was go through all Land Valley, go through all Land Valley. So I always think of that. But I loved Moondoggy because he was this light surfer. You know, that show didn't require me to dig too deep, which is not a problem, but it was fun to go to those sessions because Tony is great.
yeah.
And I got to have fun on a actiony show rather than have to dig deep every time.
So I know one of the other main horror series you were in with Vampire Knight. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, that was cool to see you in that role after, like, because for me it was like, oh, seeing Steven X, like he might not be able to voice a character like that again, but oh, then a Vampire Knight finally comes around. There's another horror series that he's
Yeah, and that show was cool for that reason, right?
yeah,
Um, but it didn't. I don't feel like it lasted very long. Like I don't feel like I spent a lot of time on that show. I remember it, but I don't feel like I was there
hmm
years the way Naruto. And you know,
right.
do you know how many episodes that show was?
It was only 12, so that's probably
Oh, yeah. So conceivably, I could have gone in for three 2 hour sessions and done all my lines on that show. So 6 hours total spent on that show,
right.
maybe more, but you get the idea.
Yeah. So uh, yeah. So then I think the next main big thing would have been when you were in Kill la Kill.
Hmm.
Was
That was
that?
also a fun show because I liked that character. Those
Yeah.
arch, very sophisticated. They're fun because it's easier to do what you want to do. It's easier to do your own thing when you've got a little more latitude, a little more room. And Inamuta had a lot of that. Plus, just from a technical standpoint, because of this, there were so many fewer lines that I had to concentrate on synchronization, so I could just act it out my own way. I wasn't hamstrung by the flaps that are not necessarily cooperative when you're trying to build a sentence or a statement or emotion.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that show was fun. It had a lot of color.
Yep. Totally. Um, wanted to go back.
And I'm so sorry. And that I had never worked with Alex before or Hidaway, and so it
Oh
was
yeah. Yeah.
fun getting to work with them on a show that they took great care in making sure was done right.
Yeah. I was just about to ask what it was like for you to step into Sailor Moon. Unless, did you really know how big it was?
I did, and I feel like I've been in an iteration or two of Sailor Moon. The most recent one I was playing, oh gosh, Susan,
Rubius.
yeah, Rubius, who I always would call Crispin Rubens,
Yeah.
and she laughed because I could never remember Rubius, so I would always call him Crispin Rubens, but
Oh,
it's Rubius, yes. But I've been here and there on a Sailor Moon before in other capacities, so yeah, I was well aware of it, and I also like that character for the same reasons of Inamuta, because I don't know, he was kind of a bad guy, but a silly bad guy, and
yeah.
that was fun.
Uh, it was cool for me too. Like when I saw, besides the newer voice actors who were in this read of a Sailor Moon,
Yeah.
I loved seeing people like you and like Lex Lang and Sandy Fox and Veronica Taylor, like all these like
Yeah.
golden age of anime people coming back to work on a show that's so iconic.
Yeah, that show had a lot of what do I want to say, buzz in our community, just because we were all doing we were all doing parts on it. So I would see Lex and I was like, oh yeah, that's Sailor Moon. Oh my gosh, that's right, because Lex directed the second season of Iron Blooded Orphans, and
Yeah,
so I'd see him a lot on that, and that we were all part of the new Sailor Moon, which is always fun. I mean, I didn't have a ton of lines, but I went in enough times. And again, always have fun working at Studiopolis, and Susie directing that. That was fun. We laughed a lot on that show too, coming up with all the ways that Rubius would do his evil deeds.
yep. Well, since you just mentioned orphans, I know that you've been in you've been bigger parts in several different Gundam shows, even going back from
Yeah, way back.
yeah,
8th Mobile Infantry,
yep,
also one of my first roles.
yep.
So
And
I've
I
been
think
associated with Gundam for a long time.
is that well, this is kind of a general question too, but after you would have a big part in an anime, would you watch it like storyline wise?
At the beginning, that was difficult because when I was doing anime at the beginning, the only way it wasn't on TV. You had to buy
Yep,
DVDs, and so often you would do a show and you would get a DVD set at the end, and sometimes you wouldn't. And then, truthfully, by that time, I'm 4 projects ahead, working on something new. But now that things are on TV, I'll pick up an episode here and there because it's easy to go to Netflix, look up Kakagurui, and watch a few minutes.
yep.
But
Yeah,
now that I'm directing, the truth is I've seen all the episodes. I don't need to watch them anymore because I've seen them 8 times a piece.
true. Yeah. I loved that. I loved seeing that you were directing the dubs of Demon Slayer too, because
Uh huh.
that's
I'm doing the
the movie.
it's series, and then there's also a movie that's coming out that, from what I understand, was huge in Japan.
Yep, and that's just it's such a beautiful show, and
Mm-hmm.
it has this like feel of retro anime too, because of the setting and just the storyline and the
Yeah,
art style.
but like it's impossible to watch that show and not automatically notice the way it looks.
Yep,
It is a clean, beautiful looking show, and I don't know if you've seen Mugen Train,
the,
eh,
the
but
trailer. Yeah,
it's beautiful. Everything about it looks so smooth and amazing. I can't wait to see how it comes out when we're done recording.
is there already like a date that it's supposed to come out in the U.S.?
Uh, that I think is all TBD because of everything that's going on.
Okay, so how long have you been working on dubbing the movie?
Not very long. It
Okay,
doesn't take very long
yeah,
because the hard work is done by other people in the
yep,
office, meaning naked translation has to come in. It has to be adapted. It has to be
yep,
put on paper, scripted, time coded, spotted, approved,
right,
combed over, cast. And then when it comes to us, the work has been done. We have to just fill in the voices and the character, like what I was talking about, one at a time. What's going on right here? How can you make this as believable as possible in these 3 syllables that you have to record right now?
yep,
So I would say the dubbing itself only takes maybe 10. working days.
Okay.
There's, maybe 1,800 lines
Mhm.
total.
Yeah. So just a few other things I can ask you. Have you ever looked into, like, because I'm sure you know what like cells, like animation cells, like what those are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because that's my main hobby. I've been collecting them for anime, obviously up until they were no longer used.
Right.
That's,
When digital was just how it is.
yeah. And I thought it was interesting that Wendy actually told me that she has a few from characters that she's voiced, and it made me think like, oh, there has to be a good amount of other voice actors that started in older anime who do that too, and it's just like not really talked about.
I don't have even one cell, nor have I found myself in a situation where I could even acquire one. I suppose I could
Yeah.
investigate that,
Yeah.
but I never have. I do have a lot of art
Hmm.
that people send me, which is
Yeah.
similar to cells. Where is it? Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have it at the ready. But some people make some really great. There it is. Like this is made out of tape. Like these are
Wow.
pieces of tape.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That kind of stuff. I realize it's not a cell, but
Yeah.
really neato, uh, almost bespoke. What's it called when people just make art, folk art, like stuff like that? Really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, because one of the like first, I don't have it anymore, but one of the first majorly expensive ones I bought was it was a cell of Suboshi from Fushigi Yuugi, and he's actually really difficult to find. I don't know why, but um, yeah, but mostly I focus on series like prior to the 21st century because that's just what I grew up with, and
Yeah, old school.
yeah, I just think that I mean most of my favorite anime voice actors are all people who worked on those shows in comparison to like it's the voices that I have all instilled in my head.
Yeah, that's where you were. No, I can't believe you where you were actualized into anime. Well, there's a that's the wrong word, but it's indoctrinated
Yeah.
into anime from those sounds, and you just have sentimentality and a connection to them.
I actually had a story too that I wanted to say. It was at the same when I first started watching Fushigi Yugi. I was in fourth grade, and I had been renting it from Blockbuster, and and like just one night while I was in the middle of progressing through the series, we like me and my parents went out to eat, and it was a normal, completely normal night, and then we were told that all of a sudden that nobody can leave because there's a guy that shot someone and crashed his car outside the restaurant and was like and he was fleeing on foot, so nobody could leave until he was subdued. So then we had to like stay there for 4 hours, and everybody had to get individually escorted to their car. So yeah. So like when I would come home and watch Fushigi Yugi, like that was, one of the main things that helped me cope with that when I was like 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah, a respite, a hiding place, a comfort zone.
Yeah. So and like you and Wendy and some other people in that show were just like the main voices that I would
Yeah,
remember.
it resonates when you're thinking about it that you were there connecting to
Yeah.
it.
So I just like I'll always have, specific anime dub voice actors associated with that with helping me feel better. So I just wanted to make sure that I told you that.
Well, that's nice. Thank you. And that's part of the the gift of the performance, the impact that we don't even know we're having
Yeah.
a year later from a recording session that I did, and
Mhm.
that's what's the gratifying part of being associated with storytelling because it matters. It has an impact. But you're nice to say that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I wanted to also ask because Wendy had a story about knowing him if you knew Michael Lindsay very well.
Uh huh. I did know him very well. we had the same agent.
Oh,
And so, like I said earlier, back in the day of Mona, Michael, we're talking the 90s,
yeah.
96 forward. I bet I met Michael in 1996.
Okay.
And so I would see him in the office every single day at the time. When there was no recording at home, you had to go into your agent's office to read, and that would be 4 times a week minimum, right? And I
Yeah.
would see him all those times. We'd sit in the waiting room, we'd read auditions together, we've been in commercials together. I was in a commercial with him one time, and we were the talent, and we were in the booth, and it was hard to get what management wanted because they were on the other side discussing it, but they kept asking for these changes, and those changes just kept resulting in Michael's lines being cut.
Oh,
um, they wanted something else. And when I got called into the control room for them to discuss what they wanted from my character, which they were cutting Michael's lines in order to make room for, I understood the scope. But we got back in, and they just kept cutting his lines, and he threw his script up, and he goes, "Well, I guess I'm serving peanuts on this flight," and it slayed me. I just remember thinking that was the funniest thing I had ever heard. I was like, I got to remember that peanuts line. So yes, I knew Michael very well, and then he moved away, and yes, I was saddened and surprised to hear of his death, which probably at this time I can't tell time anymore. But 2 years ago,
yeah.
yeah, no, I knew him well. He was fun. He had a great story, I liked him. We got along.
Were there? I mean, maybe I'm just not thinking of them, but he's like the main anime voice actor that started in that same time frame that has passed away since then. I don't think there's anybody else.
A young man just passed away last week, but I didn't know him.
I don't think I heard that.
Kirby?
Oh, yeah, he was Canada. He was based in Canada, yeah, and he was only 47.
I know. But I may have worked with him once, but 30 minutes, maybe.
Yeah,
So I was aware of that. And in fact, that made me think of Michael.
yep. So I guess the last thing I could ask you is, what do you want your what do you want your legacy to be for fans that have been a fan of you for since Fushigi Yuugi at the beginning, or people that are just coming to know your voice? Like, what do you want
Yeah,
that
it's
to be?
something that I had never thought about, but then time goes by and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm from the golden age. I still thought of myself as relevant. And so I believe that is an aspect of a legacy because those things never go away.
Yep.
And then as I've moved into directing, which is something I've been able to do mostly because I have experience in acting, and that is another type of legacy because in some ways the control that I never could exert over my performance as an actor, as a director, I get to exert. So in many ways, I get to make these shows the way I want to make them. As an actor, I had to do what I was told, and now I'm the one telling people what to do, and that has nothing to do with control. It just means finally it gets to be the way I want to hear it, as opposed to what I wanted to do, but then what another director would say. Now,
Yeah.
granted, there's a lot of other people who want it to sound a certain way too, but in terms of in the room, I get to choose how it sounds, and that's gratifying because then all I have to do is trust my ear.
Yep. Uh, when you look, I don't know how long it's been since you've listened to some of your earlier roles in anime, but are you still proud of like how you voice those characters then? Did you ever think
Yeah,
about that?
sometimes anime's hard because it can be a little cardboard. It's difficult to do sync, and you hear things, and you're like, oh, I wish that could be a little more real, but it's acceptable. And then there are things that I see where I'm like, oh, that was good, or that was funny, or I don't remember doing that, or
Yeah.
performances that I was like, wow, I thought I would be embarrassed. Me and Quentin went down, gosh, 2 years ago to a film festival that was playing Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, and we
Oh
were
yeah.
me, Quentin and Bo, I think, were the guests. And I was nervous to see this movie because I hadn't seen it in 10 years. And I thought, oh, I hope I don't have to sit here in person and cringe over myself, but
Yeah.
pretend I'm not cringing. And it started, and I was like, oh, okay. I was like, oh, I thought I was pretty good in that. So that's gratifying to see something after that long. And how do I put it? Not necessarily thought I was good, but was not embarrassed in front of people.
Yeah.
That's the bar.
And the next person I'm interviewing, do you have any stories about Aaron Fitzgerald? Have you worked
Uh,
with a lot?
no, I do feel that we have been in association over time, but she's a perfect example of someone who I've worked with a few times, who we know each other and laugh, but that
Yeah.
we have not. Our paths are always doing this because you're leaving when someone else is coming, or your two
Yeah.
sessions have finished and you're walking out, and you have a few laughs in the lobby. But she and I are definitely been familiar with each other over the years, and I will say, someone super fun to have in a session.
Yeah.
Definitely fun.
Yeah. I can tell.
Yeah, you can tell her I said that.
Well, thank you. This was fun for me. I'm glad that I got to talk to you about roles that I'm sure nobody else has. I couldn't find anybody else talking to you about like Fushigi Yuugi or Nightwalker or
No,
anything.
that gets brought up, but like some of the other ones you reminded me of, I'm like, wow, I gotta revisit some of this stuff from years ago. So I am glad you brought it up for that reason for me personally, but also so that you get to have some perspective on stuff that you've been a fan of yourself for 20 years.
Yeah, because I mean, I would have never thought that if anybody told me when I was just watching Fushigi Yuugi or something when I was in fourth grade that I'd be like interviewing voices that I had instilled in my head when I was a kid. Like I would have
You would have
never.
been like, wait, what?
Yeah, right.
That's how I feel when I work with people who I used to watch on TV when I was a kid, and I'm like, if
Oh
you had
yeah,
told me that I would be sitting in a room with so and so collaborating, same thing, yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been
Well,
fun for
thank you
me.
for asking me to do this, Chris. You know, now that we're in this, what I'm just going to keep calling quarantine, it makes this easier
Yeah,
because I don't have to fly somewhere and whatever, and we're able to make it happen. So I appreciate you asking me, and you stay in touch.
yeah. I'll be sure to send you the link once I get it uploaded to YouTube.
Oh yeah, let me know. Keep me posted.